December 20th, 1968, Vallejo, California. The night was still. A cold wind swept across Lake Herman Road, a quiet stretch of asphalt cutting through the rolling hills between Benicia and Vallejo. It was a kind of road where nothing ever happens, until it does. At 11:14 p.m., two teenagers, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, were parked in a 1961 Rambler station wagon, the kind of quiet Friday night every small-town parent worries about but ultimately allows. The world around them was silent, just the hum of the night and the soft flicker of distant headlights that came and went. Then, a car pulled up behind them. Its headlights filled the rear window. It stopped. Moments later, gunshots shattered the quiet. By the time officers arrived, Betty Lou Jensen was lying face down on the ground, shot 5 times in the back as she tried to run. David Faraday was slumped against the car, a bullet wound in his head. Their lives ended before midnight. No one saw it coming. No one heard a word. And yet, that night, something began. Something that would terrify California for years and haunt the nation for decades. This was the beginning of the Zodiac. If you're new here, welcome. This channel explores the most haunting, unresolved mysteries in history. So before we continue, take a second to subscribe. It helps us keep uncovering the stories the world has yet to close. Now let's go back. 1968 was the dawn of a restless America. Protests, assassinations, a generation questioning authority. In Northern California, though, life was still ordinary. Vallejo was a quiet town with military families, working-class neighborhoods, and the kind of police force that wasn't used to dealing with serial murder. The double killing on Lake Herman Road didn't immediately strike investigators as the work of something larger. At first, they thought it might have been a crime of passion, a jealous ex-boyfriend, or a robbery gone wrong. But the scene was strange. Nothing was stolen, no signs of sexual assault, and the shots, controlled, methodical, were fired from a .22 caliber weapon. Whoever did this, they weren't new to violence. Still, without leads, the case went cold. 6 months later, he struck again. It was a warm Independence Day in Vallejo. Fireworks echoed across the city, flashes lighting up the night sky. At around midnight, another young couple, Darlene Farron, 22, and Michael Mageau, 19, parked at Blue Rock Springs Park. It was a place where couples went for privacy, not danger. Then headlights again. A car pulled up behind them. At first, Darlene thought it might be a friend. She even smiled. But seconds later, the driver got out and walked toward them holding a flashlight and a gun. Without warning, he fired 5 shots into the car. Both victims were hit. As the man turned to walk away, he suddenly stopped, then came back and fired again, point blank. It was ruthless, calculated, and it marked the beginning of the most infamous killing spree in California's history. But this time, the killer wasn't finished. Less than an hour after the shooting, a call came into the Vallejo Police Department. The voice was calm. "Male." He spoke clearly, as if reading a script. "I want to report a double murder. If you go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway, you'll find kids in a brown car. They've been shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye." Then, a click. Police rushed to the scene. Darlene Farron was dead. Michael Mageau, though gravely wounded, survived. He described the shooter as a white male, heavy-set, about 5 feet 8 inches, with short brown hair. But in the darkness and under shock, his memory blurred. Still, that call changed everything. This wasn't random. This was someone telling the police that he killed before and would kill a guy. And 3 weeks later, on July 31st, 1969, local newspapers in San Francisco, Vallejo, and Napa received handwritten letters. Each began the same way. Dear Editor, and each claimed responsibility for both attacks. The writer demanded the letters be printed on the front page of each newspaper, or, as he threatened, I will go on a killing rampage Friday night. Enclosed with the letters was something else, a cipher, 3 of them, each a third of what he called his secret message. The writer signed with a strange crosshair-like symbol, a circle with a cross through it. He called himself the Zodiac. At first, the papers hesitated. The threat seemed outrageous, a madman trying to gain attention. But when police confirmed that the details in the letters matched information only the killer could have known, the decision was made. The San Francisco Chronicle, Examiner, and Vallejo Times-Herald each printed their portion of a cipher. Within hours, California was on edge. People locked their doors. Couples avoided quiet roads. And the mystery of the Zodiac was born. Days later, a couple from Salinas, Donald and Betty Harden, sat down with their morning paper. Donald, a high school teacher, and Betty, a puzzle enthusiast, decided to take a shot at cracking the code. By the next day, they had it solved. The message read, I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all. The chilling arrogance shocked even veteran investigators. There was no remorse, no demand for money or fame, just pleasure and a taunt that this was only the beginning. What made the Zodiac terrifying wasn't just his violence. It was the way he played with the world, writing letters, sending cryptic ciphers, mocking detectives and journalists alike. He wanted attention, he wanted fear, and he wanted control. Police had no fingerprints, no DNA, no solid suspect. Just words that dripped with intelligence and ego. In one letter, he even taunted investigators for misspelling a victim's name, writing, If you cops think I'm going to take credit for all these crimes, you're wrong. I only kill when I feel like it. And with every line, his legend grew. The Vallejo Police Department worked tirelessly with neighboring agencies, but coordination was messy. Jurisdictions clashed. Evidence wasn't centralized. One detective later said, The Zodiac didn't outsmart us, he out-organized us. Leads poured in. Suspects came and went. And while police searched for one man, the Zodiac prepared to strike again. It was a bright Saturday afternoon. College students Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were picnicking on the shores of Lake Berryessa. A man approached them, wearing a dark hood, sunglasses, and a bib-like chest piece marked with the same crosshair symbol. He claimed to be an escaped convict. He said he needed their car and some money. Then he pulled out a knife. He tied them up, stabbed them repeatedly, and left them for dead. Before leaving, he walked to their car and wrote in black marker on the door, Vallejo, December 20th, 68, July 4th, 69, September 27th, 69, 6:30. By knife, he signed it again with that same symbol. Cecilia died 2 days later. Brian survived. The Zodiac was no longer a shooter hiding in the dark. He was now something else, a man who enjoyed the ritual of terror itself. From that day on, his letters would grow bolder, his taunts crueler, and his identity darker and more elusive than ever. The newsroom was buzzing. Typewriters clacked. Phones rang. Editors shouted over the noise. Amid the chaos, a secretary carried an envelope. unmarked except for a familiar symbol, a circle with a cross through it. Inside was a 3-page letter written in a childish scrawl. The words were uneven, deliberate, and cruel. "This is a Zodiac speaking." It was the first time he used that phrase, and it became his signature. From that day forward, California had a name for the phantom haunting them. The Zodiac wasn't just a murderer. He was now a voice. He spoke through ink and paper, to the front pages of newspapers that millions read every morning. And he loved it. He wrote about his crimes, taunted detectives, and claimed future victims. Sometimes, his letters came with cryptic ciphers. Other times, they contained details only the killer could know. But one thing was clear. The Zodiac wanted to be seen. He wanted control. In November 1969, just weeks after the Lake Barris attack, another letter arrived. This time it contained a new code, one even more complex than the first. The 340-character cipher. It was a grid of strange symbols, circles, triangles, letters reversed and mirrored. Experts, cryptographers, even the military tried to solve it and failed. For over 50 years, that cipher remained one of the greatest mysteries in true crime history. It wasn't until December 2020, half a century later, that a team of private citizens finally cracked it using computer algorithms and linguistic patterning. The message read, "I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me. That wasn't me on the TV show. I am not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise all the sooner." The Zodiac's words revealed a chilling sense of superiority and a deep fascination with control. He wasn't hiding from the police. He was mocking them. By late 1969, the Zodiac was a national headline. He wrote to the San Francisco Chronicle, the Examiner, and even television stations. In one letter, he threatened to shoot school buses full of children. "I shall cruise around and pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out," he wrote. The public panic was immediate. Police escorted buses. Parents kept their children home. Reporters swarmed law enforcement for any update. And the Zodiac watched, amused, as fear spread faster than bullets. That autumn night in San Francisco began like any other. At around 9:55 p.m., cab driver Paul Stein picked up a fare at the corner of Mason and Geary Streets. The destination, written on his trip sheet, was Washington and Maple, an upscale residential area in Presidio Heights. 10 minutes later, residents heard a gunshot. When police arrived, they found Paul Stein slumped in his seat, shot once in the head. His wallet and keys were missing, and so was a portion of his shirt. The killer had wiped down the cab before leaving. Calm, deliberate. Witnesses described a white male, around 35 to 45 years old, stocky build, wearing glasses, walking casually away from the scene. The Zodiac had just struck again, this time in the heart of a major city. Minutes after the murder, 2 San Francisco officers, Donald Falk and Eric Zelms, responded to the call. They turned a corner onto Jackson Street, and there he was, a man walking calmly, matching the description. But dispatch had mistakenly said the suspect was African American, so the officers drove past him. Later, when the Zodiac wrote another letter, he taunted them. "Hey, blue pigs, I was the man you stopped on Jackson Street that night." The implication was chilling. They had been face to face with the killer, and he'd slipped through their fingers. Days later, the San Francisco Chronicle received another letter. Inside was a small, blood-stained piece of cloth. It matched the torn shirt Paul Stein had been wearing the night he was killed. There was no longer any doubt. The Zodiac had done it, and once again he used his letter to taunt the world. I am the murderer of the taxi driver. The police could have caught me last night if they had searched the park properly. He described his escape route in detail, how he'd watched police in the shadows as they searched nearby. It was a confession, but also a show. He wanted everyone to know he was still out there, watching, unbothered. Throughout 1970, the letters kept coming. Sometimes they contained ciphers. Other times, diagrams like a bomb he claimed to be building to blow up school buses. Investigators couldn't tell what was real and what was performance. The Zodiac seemed to be blurring the line between crime and theater. In one letter, he even mocked the police for calling him insane. I am not sick. I am insane. But that will not stop the game. Newspapers were torn between ethics and fear. If they printed his letters, they gave him attention. If they didn't, he might kill again. So, reluctantly, they published them. Every word, every taunt, every cipher. It was the first time a killer had successfully used the media as his weapon. He controlled the conversation, the fear, even the timing of public panic. And for the first time, the police weren't leading the investigation. The Zodiac was. By spring of 1970, Zodiac's tone shifted. He began targeting individuals, notably journalist Paul Avery of the San Francisco Chronicle. A letter arrived addressed specifically to him. It read, "Paul Avery, you are doomed." It was signed, of course, with the crosshair. Soon after, someone, possibly the same person, sent Halloween cards to reporters and police officers. Each contained cryptic lines and strange symbols, as if daring them to interpret his next move. Avery started carrying a gun. Police increased patrols. And yet there was no arrest, no name, no face, only the symbol and the letters. By 1971, the letters began to slow. The killings, at least the confirmed ones, stopped, but the fear didn't, and neither did the speculation. Some believed he had died. Others thought he was in prison for another crime. And many believed he simply enjoyed watching his legend grow without having to lift a finger. Every unsolved murder in California for the next decade seemed to come under one shadow. Could this be Zodiac? By the mid-1970s, Zodiac wasn't just a case file. He was folklore. Books, films, and endless theories turned him into a dark celebrity. Unlike other killers, Zodiac had no clear motive, no identity, and no resolution. He was a phantom who wrote his own story, then vanished, leaving the world to finish it. In the next chapter, detectives will start to focus on a handful of men, suspects whose names would echo through true crime history: Arthur Lee Allen, Rick Marshall, Lawrence Kane, and others who might have been closer to the truth than anyone ever realized. Stacks of letters, files piled high, maps marked with red pens. Every detective in Northern California knew his name, but none knew his face. The Zodiac had become more than a killer. He was an idea, a ghost in human form, slipping through the cracks of bureaucracy and ego. For every new clue, 10 new questions surfaced. And as the letters faded, investigators were left with only fragments. Fragment of handwriting, fingerprints smudged by care, and a list of names that promised hope but delivered frustration. Arthur Lee Allen, born in 1933, a former elementary school teacher, dishonorably dismissed after accusations of inappropriate conduct with children. He lived in Vallejo, not far from the Zodiac's early crime scenes. He owned firearms. He was intelligent, eccentric, and fascinated by codes. And when detectives searched his trailer in 1972, they found something that made their blood run cold. A wristwatch, a Zodiac brand marked with the same crosshair symbol. They found knives, firearms, and tapes about cryptography. He even told acquaintances he wanted to kill people, that he fantasized about hunting humans, the very language Zodiac used in his first cipher. One friend recalled Alan once saying, "Man is the most dangerous animal," the same phrase that appeared in the cipher cracked by the Har. Dens. Investigators were convinced. They believed they had him, but the evidence was circumstantial. Alan's fingerprints didn't match. His handwriting, though similar, didn't conclusively align with the Zodiac's letters. And his DNA, later tested decades after his death, also failed to connect him. Detectives had come close, but not close enough. Still, many within law enforcement remained certain. If Zodiac was anyone, he was Arthur Lee Allen. When David Fincher's 2007 film Zodiac reignited public fascination, Allen once again became the face of the enigma. Though he died in 1992, never charged, never cleared. But Allen wasn't the only suspect. There were others, dozens, in fact, each with fragments that fit the puzzle and others that didn't. Rick Marshall worked in theaters. He was intelligent, quiet, and known to be a film enthusiast who recorded his own voice for radio-style programs. Some witnesses claimed the Zodiac's letters reflected an obsession with movies, references to Most Dangerous Game, and even Mikado, a play the Zodiac quoted multiple times. Marshall also owned a reel-to-reel tape recorder, similar to one believed used in some of Zodiac's phone calls. But like many others, his prints, handwriting, and DNA didn't match. And without physical proof, suspicion evaporated. Then there was Lawrence Kane, a Navy veteran with intelligence training, fluent in cryptography, and a history of stalking women. He matched the description given by surviving victim Brian Hartnell: short, stocky, balding. He lived and worked in the Bay Area, within miles of multiple crime scenes. When police showed a photograph of Kane to one of the witnesses from the Paul Stein case, she hesitated, and then said, "He looks like the man I saw that night." It was the closest anyone had come to recognition. But once again, nothing definitive. No fingerprints. No confession. No proof. The Zodiac's handwriting became a science of its own. Forensic document examiners spent years comparing loops, curves, and strokes across the killer's letters. Dozens of suspects were tested, and though similarities surfaced, especially with Allen and Kane, no one's writing could be proven identical beyond doubt. The killer was careful. He changed his style, varied his slants, even disguised letters. He was evolving, anticipating what investigators would do. As the case deepened, profilers began studying his psychology, trying to understand why. He wasn't driven by passion or revenge. He didn't target specific victims. He chose random people, strangers in cars, lovers in parks, a taxi driver in a city full of witnesses. The pattern wasn't in who he killed, but how he wanted to be seen. Asterisk. He wanted fear, attention, recognition. He wanted to prove that he could take life, and then write about it, and no one could stop him. That craving for power made him unique among serial killers. He didn't just kill for thrill, he killed for audience. As the years went on, the investigation didn't fade, it multiplied. Ordinary citizens became investigators. Armchair detectives pored over the ciphers, letters, and police reports. Some devoted their entire lives to the case. Forums, books, documentaries, and entire databases were created by people convinced they could succeed where the police failed. A few even claimed to have cracked the remaining ciphers, but none of their solutions were verified. The 1980s and 1990s brought waves of renewed interest. Each decade, new technologies promised new breakthroughs. Fingerprints were digitized. DNA profiling emerged. But every sample from the letters and envelopes came back inconclusive. Too contaminated, too degraded, or missing entirely. Each false lead reignited the mystery. Every time a suspect was eliminated, the Zodiac's ghost seemed to grin wider. Though the confirmed Zodiac letters ended in 1971, more kept arriving through the 1970s and 1980s. Some were likely forgeries. Others, maybe not. One arrived in 1978, claiming to be the Zodiac's return. It read, "I am back with you." The handwriting looked right. The tone fit. But experts were divided. Some said it was real. Others called a hoax written by someone within the investigation itself. Even among police, the Zodiac's reach caused fractures of trust. By the 1990s, the Zodiac case officially went cold. No arrests, no charges, no confessions. Files were boxed up and moved from department to department. Detectives retired or died, and yet new investigators continued to quietly revisit the case. Fresh eyes, fresh technology. Each believed maybe they could be the one to end it. August 26, 1992. Arthur Lee Allen collapsed in his home from a heart attack. When police arrived, they found piles of boxes labeled Evidence Zodiac. He had been obsessed too, perhaps with his own legend, or perhaps with the idea of being thought of as the killer. We'll never know whether he wore that symbol as a mask or as his trut. H. Most serial killers, when caught, eventually talk. They crave the validation, the recognition of power. But Zodiac never gave that satisfaction. If he was ever identified, he took his secret to the grave. And so, the case remains the most enduring riddle in American crime. In recent years, technology has revived hope. DNA analysis of the envelopes, handwriting AI comparisons, and open-source intelligence have brought new possibilities. Amateur sleuths now collaborate online, analyzing every symbol, every line of the killer's words. The 340 cipher was solved after 51 years by a group of these same digital detectives. Proof that time hasn't killed curiosity. And perhaps one day, that same curiosity will lead to his name. The Zodiac case isn't just about a man who killed. It's about how one human being used fear as art, how he turned murder into communication, and how the world, for decades, kept listening. A gray morning fog drifts over the Golden Gate Bridge. Cars hum softly through the mist. And somewhere, maybe in an evidence locker, maybe in someone's memory, the Zodiac still lingers. It's been more than 50 years. Half a century since those first letters arrived, stamped with a strange crosshair. And yet, the case remains one of the most studied mysteries in criminal history, not just for violence, but for what it revealed about us, our need to understand, our obsession with pattern, and our fear of what hides behind intelligence turned to cruelty. Why? The Zodiac case has never been officially closed. Every few years, new evidence resurfaces, a letter re-examined, a suspect rediscovered. In 2002, the San Francisco Police Department extracted DNA from one of the envelopes sent by Zodiac, but it was partial, degraded, and insufficient to match any known suspect. In 2018, after the Golden State Killer was identified using genetic genealogy, many believed Zodiac would be next. His DNA might still be on a stamp on the back of an envelope, waiting for science to catch up. But so far, no match has come. Today, the Zodiac investigation lives not only in police files, but in living rooms and laptops across the world. Thousands of online sleuths, digital detectives, pore over scans of his letters, photographs, and official reports. They recreate timelines, map routes, and test cipher theories using modern cryptographic algorithms. Forums like Zodiac Killer Facts and Theories.net host endless debates, some rational, others spiraling into obsession. To many, Zodiac isn't just a criminal. He's a riddle to be solved, a mystery that transcends time, the ultimate unfinished story. In October 2021, a team of independent investigators called the Case Breakers made headlines worldwide. They announced they had identified the Zodiac Killer as Gary Francis Post, a deceased Air Force veteran who had lived in California. Their evidence? A photograph showing scars on Post's forehead that resembled marks described by a surviving victim, handwriting similarities, and links between Post's movements and several Zodiac crime scenes. They even claimed forensic proof connected him to the killing of Sherry Jo Bates, a 1966 murder in Riverside often suspected to be Zodiac's first attack. But law enforcement quickly pushed back. The FBI and Riverside police both stated, "The Zodiac case remains open and unsolved. We have no new confirmation." To this day, Post's identification remains unproven. Another theory in a sea of them. October 30th, 1966, nearly 2 years before the first confirmed Zodiac attack, 18-year-old college student Sherry Jo Bates was found murdered near the library of Riverside City College. She had been stabbed and nearly decapitated. A handwritten confession letter was later mailed to police and newspapers signed, "Beware, I am stalking your girls now." Years later, Zodiac researchers noticed eerie similarities, phrasing, tone, and handwriting that seemed to echo his later letters. Some experts believe the Bates murder was his first. Others argue the evidence is too circumstantial. If it was him, the Zodiac began earlier than anyone realized, and had already learned to use letters as we. Pawns. Of the 4 main Zodiac ciphers, 2 remain unsolved to this day, the Z13 and the Z32. Each is short, just a few lines, but cryptographers call them taunting codes. They may contain the killer's real name, or they may be nonsense, designed to mock anyone who dares to look for meaning. Experts in linguistics and pattern recognition have spent decades running computer models against them. Every few years, a new solution surfaces, only to fall apart under scrutiny. It's possible the final answers were never meant to be solved, that the Zodiac's true mastery was in encryption, but in knowing that humans can't stand not knowing. Over time, the Zodiac evolved from a headline into a symbol. Books, movies, songs, even graphic novels have reimagined him. From David Fincher's Zodiac to documentaries that dissect every theory ever made. But beneath all the retellings lies a disturbing truth. No one ever saw him unmasked. No one ever heard his real name spoken aloud. And maybe that's why his story endures. He became the embodiment of uncertainty, the fear that evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it writes you a letter. Amid the mystery, it's easy to forget the names that mattered most. David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, teenagers whose lives ended on Lake Herman Road. Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mageau, whose night at Blue Rock Springs changed history. Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, attacked at Lake Berryessa, where terror wore a hood. Paul Stein, a cab driver doing his job, unaware that his fare was already famous. Each of them deserves more than a cipher. Each was a person, not a puzzle. And perhaps that's a quiet tragedy of the Zodiac case, that in chasing the mystery, the world often forgot the humanity beneath it. The Zodiac exposed something unsettling, not just in himself, but in us. When his letters arrived, newspapers printed them, feeding the fear he wanted. When he threatened school buses, headlines screamed louder. He understood that horror spreads faster when we give a stage. And in doing so, he pioneered something no one had seen before. A killer who manipulated mass media like a performance artist. Every story about him became part of his plan. Every rumor, every movie, every online debate, exactly what he wanted. Immortality through mystery. Even now, the list of suspects continues to grow. Some believe the Zodiac was a single man. Others think he was multiple people, an ideology, a collective of imitators. There are theories linking him to military intelligence, secret societies, even the Manson family. None proven, all fascinating. The most chilling thought, perhaps, is that Zodiac simply stopped. He might have lived an ordinary life afterward. Went to work, raised a family, watched the world speculate about a killer who was him all along. The Zodiac case remains officially unsolved. But, in a way, solving it was never what he wanted. He once wrote, "When I die, I will be reborn in paradise, and all the people I have killed will become my slaves." It's the language of delusion, yet it carried the quiet arrogance of a man who believed immortality was within reach. And he was right, not in the way he imagined, but in how his name endures. Every time a new theory emerges, every time someone reopens his letters, every time another documentary airs, the Zodiac lives again, a ghost fed by curiosity, an enigma kept alive by our need for answers. Maybe the Zodiac is gone. Maybe he's been gone for decades. But the fear he created, the fascination he sparked, they remain. The case reminds us that evil doesn't always end when the killing stops. Sometimes it endures in symbols and stories, in the spaces we can't fill with certainty. And that's why, even now, more than half a century later, the Zodiac Killer still writes to us, not with letters or ciphers, but through the silence of the questions he left behind. If you've stayed with me through this story, thank you. If you want to keep exploring the mysteries that refuse to rest, make sure you're subscribed. There are more shadows to walk through, and more questions waiting for the light.